Morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Government Pension Fund Committee. Before we proceed, I'd like to draw your attention to this award that sits in front of me on the desk. This award was for Best Climate Change Strategy, which we picked up in December in London. And we very, very narrowly missed out on Pension Fund of the Year. So well done, pat on the back for everyone. We've done really well. And I imagine after today it'll go and sit on Jeff's desk. So there we are. Right. Right, so let's get into the meeting. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, good. The second item is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Are there any? Jan?
Yeah, I'm in receipt of a local government pension, right?
Phil?
Phil Rogers, yes. We've got two Phils, that's a problem. Are you in? Hello?
Yes, Phil, I can hear you. Go on.
Okay, sorry. What it is, we've got two Phils on the committee, so it's difficult which one. I'm actually a member of the scheme, and so is my wife. So I'm declaring. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil, down in.
Yeah, usual thing, Chair. My brother's a member of the pension fund.
Thank you. Patience?
Member of the local government pensions, Chair.
Steph? Sorry.
Yes, a member of the local government pension scheme, so to declare.
And anyone in the room? Jeff and Will.
Chair, member of the LGPS.
Member of the scheme. Myself, Chair, I'm a member of the scheme.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm a member of the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. I didn't have my mic on. Sorry, didn't have my mic on. Everybody happy? The minutes? Thank you. Lovely. Cheers. Right, on to item 4, reports of the Section 151 officer. And that will be over to you, Jeff, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First item on the agenda is the draft funding strategy statement. Long-standing members of the committee may think, oh gosh, this looks like a familiar document, because you really get to review it every 3 years, really in detail, as it's the bedrock and the context, really, and the framework in which our appointed actuaries undertake their triennial evaluation. It's an important document, sets out some key assumptions and considerations, and as I say, establishes the framework in which our appointed actuaries can discharge their legal duties. In finalising this document brought before you today, we were required by law to consult with all our employers and stakeholders, which we've done. A resounding nil response from everybody. Those of you who read it, and I'm sure you all have, it's quite a dry document containing quite technical assumptions and policies surrounding certain situations and outcomes and how we deal with certain situations arising from the valuation and our dealings with employers. It's an important document. We're required to have it by law. The committee is required to approve it and sign it off prior to our actuaries delivering and certifying the triennial evaluation result. As I say, the committee would have seen it in draft form anyway. This is the final version brought before you for approval and sign off. Happy to take questions, Chair. The key updates for 2022 are highlighted throughout the report as bold text. So those are the updates from the previous version that the committee approved. So just for your ease of reference, those are the updates. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Any questions? Online? In the room? Well, in that case, I will move to the vote to approve as is recommended. So,
Recommendation is on page 6, Chair.
thank you, Jeff. So I'll move to vote. All those in favour? Thank you all. Our next item is item 4B, and that is our actuaries from Aon. And I'd like to welcome Laura and Eric to present this. Thank you. So carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and hello everybody. It's nice to be here again. So we're here really just to present the sort of final position for the valuation before we produce our final valuation report, which will be signed off before the 31st of March, which is the legal deadline. So I can confirm that everything we've done is compliant with the LGPS regulations in terms of completing it by the deadline and meeting the requirements in terms of solvency and long-term cost efficiency. We're also compliant with everything it says in your funding strategy statement, which you've just approved. And then also we can confirm we're meeting the Scheme Advisory Board expectations in terms of employer contributions and things that have happened in this valuation. We'll also be compliant with, well, we expect to be compliant with the Government Actuaries Department's expectations when they carry out a review of all the LGPS funds under Section 13 of the Public Service Pensions Act 2013. So on the agenda page then, Eric's going to talk you through the assumptions that we've used in our calculations, and I will then talk you through the final results. So without further ado, over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. So before, as Laura said before, she will reveal the results of the valuation, which you all know. I just want to give a short recap of the valuation process and talk about some of the key assumptions which we've used for the valuation. So if we move on to the next slide. Oh, thank you very much. I'll start with explaining what is a triennial actuarial valuation. So going back to basics, it's just a financial assessment of the health of the fund. And as part of this, we look at the asset and the liabilities of the fund and we compare to each other. And if there is more asset than liabilities, then the fund is in surplus. And if there is more liabilities than the assets, then the fund is in deficit. And it's important because this relation informs whether there is any past service contributions. And the key for the valuation is to set the contribution for the employers. So that's the main overriding objective of the valuation. The past service contribution is set up by looking at the asset and the liabilities. And then as part of the valuation, we also look at the cost of future benefits accruals. And that's basically to set contribution for the employers so that they can meet accrual of the new benefits. And these two parts form the contribution which are then certified for the employers. And the contribution certified for the employers come in two parts. It's the primary rate, which corresponds to that future service element. And then there is the secondary element, which corresponds to any adjustment which comes from either the deficit or the surplus, depending on whether we've got a deficit on surplus in the fund. And as Laura mentioned, when doing the evaluation, we need to comply with the regulation. And then it needs to be done every 3 years. and we've got a year from the valuation date to complete all our calculations and provide you and sign valuation report with the rates and adjustment certificate. So I've talked about the asset and the liabilities. So when we look at the asset, we take them at market value. When we look at the liabilities, we calculate them by using membership data and cash flow provided by the fund and by making a lot of assumptions. So if we move to the next slide, this is just a high-level summary of the data we've used and some experience, kind of what's happened since last valuation. And just to repeat again, in our calculation, we use the full membership provided by the fund on the valuation date. So this is membership as a snapshot, and the valuation date was 31st of March 2022. The data also includes the cash flows. So those are the benefits and contribution paid by each employer since the last valuation, which was in 2019. And at this point, I excuse me. Once again, want to say a big thank you to the officers of the fund, which provided us with the data actually ahead of the agreed timetable, and the data provided was of really good quality. So thank you very much for that. That made our life easier and enabled us to deliver all our calculation on time as well. So if we now look to the left top of the slide, there is the summary of the membership of the fund across 3 valuations. So it's the 2016, 2019, and 2022. So the obvious thing is that the membership of the fund is increasing across all categories. We've got more members, and it's it will be so because the fund is open, so it still admits new members. However, the fund is slowly maturing, so the age of members is getting higher, and this can be seen in the table below. Ever so slightly across all the categories, the average age of members is increasing. If we now move to the right-hand side, where there is the summary of the assumptions we've used for the pension increases and pay increase at the last valuation. So we expected the assumptions for the CPI increase to be 2.1% per annum. And this was more or less in line with the average CPI inflation over the 3 years. So the average CPI was 1.8. So there was a bit of an experience coming in that the cost of benefits were lower than expected by us because the pension increase awarded to members was slightly below our expectations. And the same with the pay growth. The salary increase granted to members was slightly lower than we had expected. But so they kind of impacted, they reduced slightly the liabilities at this valuation. And at this valuation, our inflation assumption is slightly up from the assumption in 2019, and that 2.3% per annum captures a bit of that high inflation, which we at the moment observing. But at the time of setting that assumptions, we were not aware of the full kind of scope and what will happen to inflation. So we've introduced an additional loading to counter that. So all the liabilities in the fund's been uplifted by 10% to take account of this high inflation which we're seeing now. And we believe the next pension increase will also be significantly higher than 2.3%, maybe not at the 10%, but somewhere in between, maybe around 5%. So that's on the assumptions. And then if we move to the next slide and start talking about, sorry, so that was on the data. So if we move now to talk a bit more about the assumptions. So when preparing the valuation, as mentioned by Jeff, we must have regard to the funding strategy statement, which just been discussed. And I just want to draw your attention to a few elements of this funding strategy which impact on the contribution levels for employers. So the key one is the prudence. So we need to make our assumptions prudent, so that the fund's got enough assets to pay the benefits to members. And obviously, the fund is a multi-employer scheme, and every employer's got slightly different profiles. So we do tailor the funding strategy to the employer needs, and we've got different funding strategy for different employers within the scheme. And then when setting the contributions, we've got certain options to allow the smoothing of the contribution, because one of the objectives as well is to make the contribution affordable and stable for the employers. And to help us achieve this is the selection of the recovery period. We can slightly extend it or shorten it depending on the circumstances. And also the fund allows stepping of contribution to further help employers with any increases or stepping down when there is a big decreases in contribution, to kind of maintain that stable contribution for employers, to make as little changes as possible. And if we move to the next slide, so which summarizes the main assumptions which we have to make as part of the valuation, and I won't go through all of them, but just the hexagons in blue, they are the financial assumptions, and all the other ones in the gray, light and dark grays, they're the demographic assumptions. But I just want to draw your attention to the key ones, which are the net discount rate, which is the difference between the discount rate and the CPI inflation, or the pension increase assumption. And on the demographic side, the key one is the post-retirement mortality. And I will talk a bit more about both of these later on. So if we move to the next slide and start from the post-retirement mortality. So when setting these assumptions, we look at two elements. So there is the base mortality and there is the future improvements. The base mortality corresponds to the mortality rates which we observe currently in the current population. But because the fund promises benefits well into the future, we need to also make assumptions about how that mortality rates will change going forward. So the way we set the assumption is to look at the specific fund data, and we've taken 10 years of the data for the Swansea Pension Fund, and we're using our in-house demographic horizon model to overlay that data with the much larger data which holds the mortality per postcode. And based on that, we come up with the best estimate assumption for the mortality. And as part of this, we also look at the impact of the pandemic and the impact the pandemic had on the mortality for the members of the Swansea Pension Fund, and we allowed for this in our assumptions. And then when it comes to the future improvements, the assumptions for how the mortality will change in future, we take the tables produced by the actuarial profession, which are the CMIs, and then we basically updated it to the recent model they've produced. We kept the same long-term improvements at 1.5%, and also kind of reflected on the pandemic when making that assumption. So when we so it's just for information at the bottom of the slide, we've got the life expectancies from age 65 summarized at two valuations. So it's kind of compares like for like. So the 2019 valuation also looks at people born at the same time. So we can see that the life expectancy has our assumptions reduced at the 2022 valuation. And the impact of this is around a reduction of 1% to the liabilities across the fund. Right. If we move to the next slide, I will just quickly cover the how we set the discount rate. So the setting of the discount rate is we start from the expected returns on assets, and then so the discount rate is directly linked to that, and then we set what we call a probability of funding success. So how likely we want to be 100% funded in some future years. And when we kind of were looking at these assumptions and discussing it with the fund, at the time we considered that it would be appropriate to increase that funding, increase the probability of funding success to be a bit more prudent at this valuation, given that we've seen quite volatile movements in the assets, returns, and also the kind of like the change in the inflation. So the decision was taken to rein back a bit on the risk and be a bit more prudent with it. So we've moved the probability of funding success from 80 to 83.5%. And then if we just move to the next slide, and this is just the summary of all the financial assumptions between the two valuations. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. It's just for information, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And then I will pass to Laura to take you through the results.
Chairman, if I could, just to emphasise on that page there that Eric has just presented in terms of those financial assumptions, as you can see, just uniformly across the board there, we've increased the prudence in all those assumptions. So therefore, taking the more risk out of the valuation process, as opposed to the assumptions that we had in 2019. So that places the 2022 valuation in a far better place going forward in terms of those assumptions and the flexibility for the fund. The next valuation, should our experience in the interim 3 years not be as great as they've been in the last 3 years, the committee will have flexibility then to consider that they'll have more options at their disposal, so we say, at the next valuation, noting the prudent decisions that the actuary and yourselves have taken at this valuation.
Thank you, Jeff, for indicating that to us. But back to you then, Laura. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's worth just mentioning that liabilities increase where your net discount rate reduces, and that has been the case in this valuation. Actually, all of our assumptions are sort of our best guess about what they'll be for the future, with the exception of the discount rate, which is where that prudence is. But the other assumptions have increased because of our expectations about the future. So yeah, they are making the liabilities higher, keeping everything else equal. It's a good point. So yeah, just looking at the valuation results briefly then. The committee will have seen these before, so they haven't changed, but we just wanted to confirm this is what's going to be in the final valuation report. We've split the value that we place on the past service liabilities between your active members, so they are still, some of those still have a link to final salary, and that's allowed for in these liabilities. And then others are using, some of the liabilities are a career average, and then you've got a split then with deferred, so people who are still members but they've left, they're not in active service anymore, and your pensioner members and their dependents. So total value of the liabilities is 2.9 billion compared to asset value of 2.9 billion, and we end up with a very small surplus. But it's worth calling out actually that the fund has performed very well over the last 3 years. If you look at the fact that the funding level was 92% in 2019, and if we hadn't put that 10% additional allowance for inflation into the liabilities, then you'd actually be sort of 110% funded. But that is an appropriate thing to do, to put that 10% in. So I think it's good to call out really strong asset performance, but we do need to be cautious about the liabilities, and that's what we have done, and that will be what the external people who are looking at our valuation will be expecting as well. So just moving on to the next slide, which summarises how we've got from the position in 2019 to the position in 2022. These are the sort of experience items that make up the change in the surplus or deficit. So the main ones here are the investment profit on the positive side. So obviously that's a very big item which dwarfs most of the other items. And you know, as Eric talked about, there's a few things where the fund has had lower pay increases and pension increases than we expected, which is a sort of funding gain. On the other side is the change in financial assumptions, which includes that 10% allowance for short-term inflation pressures. And then there's again, there's a change in the demographic assumptions, which, you know, reduces the liabilities, and then other items in there as well. So we end up with a surplus of 3 million. So just moving on then to the next slide. So the key outcome, as Eric said, in the valuation is the employer contributions. So I've summarised that here. The cost of future benefits accruing has increased, and you can see that at the top of this table. So it was 26%, it's now 27.1%. The expenses that we've allowed for and the member contribution rates haven't changed. So that means that the overall, as an average, the cost for employers on the future service has increased by 1.1%. And that's really down to that net discount rate change that we talked about. So we're placing a higher value on those liabilities, and the average age of the members is a bit higher as well. Now we have a very small surplus, but because the fund has this policy of only spreading the surplus to reduce contributions if it's over 110% funded, the outcome on average for the whole fund is that there will be no reduction to contributions for the fact that there's a small surplus, and that you end up with an overall employer rate of 21.3% on average. Now it's worth mentioning that each employer will have their own funding level based on the liabilities allocated to them and the assets, and therefore their contributions, some will be higher than that, some will be lower than that. This is the sort of average. And then coming to the end then, so just looking at the results for the majority of the employers in the fund, which are on our scheduled and subsumption body funding target. The funding level has improved for all of them. Almost all employers are now over 100% funded, so will no longer need to pay deficit contributions. So overall contributions, you know, may be lower than they were, and that's because they were paying deficit. So even though the future cost of benefits has gone up, employers are no longer paying deficit contributions. So overall, they may be paying less. There are a few exceptions to that rule, but like I said, the future service cost has gone up, but there is one item of cost that was in the last valuation, which isn't in this valuation, which is allowing for the McLeod judgment. That's all now in past service. So that's all reflected in the liabilities in the past service. So that's no longer an additional contribution that employers are being asked to make. The next slide just summarises then the, you know, how sensitive these results are to some of our key assumptions. So you're on 100% funding level at the moment, but if your life expectancy assumption increased by 2 years, then that would take your funding level down by 6%. And then we have demonstrated the, you know, the impact of a discount rate fall of 1%, or, you know, an inflation increase of 1% per annum. And that would take the funding level down by almost 20%. And then similarly, if your equities, value of your equities all fell at the valuation date by 25%, that'd be similar as well. So they are very sensitive, and, you know, inflation uncertainty is something that we have taken account of in the liabilities because it's a key one. But it's just to note that, you know, we do keep an eye on these things regularly, and we don't just wait till the next valuation to keep an eye on them. We monitor these things over time. So finally, then, I was going to just have a sort of quick comment on what's happened since 2022 valuation date. So the assets have sort of seen a negative return, -4% at the end of December. However, the liabilities, because we base our expectations for future investment returns, you know, on global market conditions and what we expect for the future, that's meant that our, you know, future investment return has actually gone up. That typically happens when asset values go down. Actually, the liability value will have gone down by probably a little bit more than the assets as a result of this. So actually, the fund, on the face of it, seems like it's doing well since the valuation date, despite the asset fall. We need to be a bit cautious because we still know that inflation is still high, but we believe the 10% allowance on top of our 2.3% per annum that we allowed for should hopefully cover us for the April 2023 increase and whatever comes out in April 2024 as well. Although we can't predict the future, we think we've got some coverage there for what may come. So we expect inflation to be higher than our 2.3% assumption until probably quarter four of this year, at least. We have made sure that we're being prudent, and the employer contributions are not set at a level where we'd have to increase them at the next valuation. That's really important for employer stability. So I think we can be confident that we've done what we can in that area. So it just remains for me to then thank everyone around this table for support and challenging questions as we go through this process. Thank you to the employers for providing the data in a timely fashion to the officers, and then to the officers for providing us really good quality data. Our final report will be signed off by the 31st of March, and that will actually also include some results of our climate change scenario modelling, which is an expectation that GAD has of us as well. And that just shows the resilience of the fund to changes in climate change scenarios on the financial and demographic assumptions. And that's it from me, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Laura. I believe we have a question from Andre from Hyman's Robinson.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just wanted, as investment advisor, to interject briefly on both the very strong asset performance over the 3 years, which is that positive experience you saw, and also on some of the actions that we're taking now that the funding position has improved so significantly. I think we made similar points at the tail end of last year at the previous committee meeting, but as most of you know, we are taking actions to reduce the level of risk in the investment strategy over time, and Jeff and Karen have been working hard, I think, to implement some of these changes, including reducing the level of equity over time, and we'll review the position further a little bit more formally over the coming months to understand the appropriate level of expected return and risk, given the excellent and stronger position that the fund is now in.
Thank you, Andre. I have a question from Will.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure this is a question for you, Laura, or for Jeff, really, but you mentioned that once we reach 110% funded, that our contributions can be reduced. To me, that doesn't sound. I'm wondering if that is an industry norm, or if it's just our fund that has control over that, really. So I think that'd probably be a question for Jeff. I'm not sure. To me, it doesn't sound too prudent, that, because 10% swings can happen quite easily, as we've seen in the figures here, and obviously with people living longer, again, as you alluded to, we don't know how much liability that might have. So I personally would expect, if I was in control of something like that, it would be a lot higher, maybe even 130% even. That's just a comment, but I just wanted to get the answer on that, please.
Obviously, Will, that trigger point for surplus redistribution is outlined within the FSS, which is part of the consultation process, and as the guys indicated, form the framework on which they base their assumptions, and it is largely dictated by the administrating authority in consultation with the actuary. Just to put it into context, I applaud your prudence, and I share the views that you have in terms of, I'm old enough to remember when the fund was barely 70% funded, and there was talks that it would go to a money purchase scheme, pay as you go, whatever. The death knell was sounded for the LGPS back then. So you're right to flag up that as a concern. However, it needs to be considered in light of affordability for employers, in the current financial climate. And for example, following this valuation, and I think it's recognised by council, and the work of this committee has been recognised by the leader in his comments, Budget Council, and no doubt by our colleagues across the way, Neath Talbot Council, when they set their council tax there, the savings that the pension fund has been able to give back to employers in terms of reduced contributions as a result of this valuation is timely and appropriate, noting the outlook for the fund as it stands now, but also the de-risking strategies that we've got in place. However, in 3 years' time, if that situation changes drastically, you as a committee are at liberty to change that trigger point and increase it to 120, 130, 150. It is largely within your remit. However, we saw, noting the fact that, you know, this is the first time we've ever been 100% funded ever, we felt 110 was quite prudent in that regard, noting in tandem with the increased prudence that the guys have plugged into the valuation assumptions this time, reduced discount rate, you know, the short-term inflation lever that we've put in there with the 10%, all reduced recovery periods, all the above would indicate that there's a lot of other prudence measures included in there as well. But the committee is at liberty to review that the next time that we update the FSS, Councillor Thomas. And you're right to flag it up. I mean, I think days gone by, where I think it was the late 90s, etc., when LGPSs were well north of 100% funded in the main. You know, they introduced a maximum funding level, you know, a statutory maximum funding level, 105%, whereby you had to, you know, you weren't allowed to maintain a funding level of 105%. I think at that point in time. However, I'm talking anecdotally. I don't know for a fact, but that was the case back then, whereby you weren't allowed to run massive surpluses. But no, you know, it's definitely a consideration for the committee to consider at the next. It's a nice problem to be in, though, isn't it, Councillor Thomas, to be in a position of being over 110% funded and being able to have the conversation of you know, do we give it back or do we retain it within the fund? Let's hope we can have that conversation in 3 years' time and be in that position.
Yeah, Chair, if I've got a couple of points to add, if that's okay, Chair. Just on your specific questions in terms of other funds who are doing this, I think so. For the last few valuations, the funds haven't been so much in surplus, there have been more deficits. But from the last valuation, we started seeing other funds starting to put in these surplus buffers, we call them. Certainly the funds we advise, there's several who have the same level as you, 110%. None have higher, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, none have higher. And I think what the point about the recovery periods, where there's a surplus, we're spreading it over 19 years. So actually, even if you're over 110%, that is only reducing contributions by, like, you know, something that's spread over nearly 20 years, which is, again, quite a prudent thing to do. So by the time you get to the next valuation, hopefully you wouldn't have reduced the contributions so much that you didn't need to then worry about increasing them again. But yeah, like, and I agree with everything else that Jeff's pointed out. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much. Is there any, Jeff, will you come back in on that?
Just a quick one, Chairman. Again, it would be remiss of me not to put on record our thanks to Laura and Eric and the rest of the guys back at Aon. The pensions admin guys, that's led by Claire Elliott and Nick Jenkins and Karen to my right here, who were instrumental in collecting the data, submitting the data, cleansing the data for the guys to undertake their hard sums in a very timely manner, and really appreciate their early engagement. I mean, the process started earlier than ever this time round, and that stood us in good stead to be able to have these ongoing conversations with our key employers like Newport Talbot and get their input into the outcome of the valuation, and is ensured a very clean process and a very positive outcome for all, as I say, recognised by the leader last week in his budget presentation, whereby he recognised the work of this committee and been able to contribute to the ongoing budgetary pressures faced by the council in alleviating some cost pressures there. Well, material cost pressures. I think one of the single largest line items within the budget in terms of savings. So yeah, the work of this committee is recognised in that regard. Yeah.
Thank you for the input, Jeff. I believe Mike's got a question. Have you, Mike?
Yes, the only question I got is what level of inflation are we assuming for the next 3 years? I know that at the moment it's running at 10%, and it probably will go down by half this year. But what about 2024 and 25?
Yep. So our valuation assumes, so the baseline is sort of 2.3% per annum, but that's over the next sort of on average for the next sort of 30 years. That's based on what was, as Eric said, back in March, when we sort of set that assumption, it was based on maybe sort of 5% for the first year, and then something slightly less than that, and then for the next year, and then lower, more like 2% for the longer future. But of this 10% loading allows for the increase in April 2023, and then what we think the inflation is going to be like. I think Eric said, maybe it'll be, when the inflation is at 30th of September, which will inform the April 2024 increase, maybe sort of 5%. So our additional 10% on top of that 2.3% for each of those years should cover us for both of those years, and then we expect or hope it will go back to, more like what the Bank of England target is.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions online or in the room? Thank you. Well, thank you very, very much for your presentation, Laura and Eric. At this point, you're quite welcome to withdraw from the meeting if you wish, because I know you've had a long journey and you need to get back.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the whole committee. It's been great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers, bye.
Right, on to item 4C, which is Jeff, I believe. Jeff is City and County Pension Fund Business Plan, I believe.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we've got to take a vote on the last.
So,
Sorry.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just to approve the report, Jeremy. Sorry, there's no cover report.
Yeah, sorry about that all. If we could take a vote on item 4B. This is to approve
Valuation.
the valuation, which is on the front of the report.
That's all in favour, Chair. That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye all. So we will move on to 4C. Sorry, Jeff.
Thanks, Chairman.
Wrong glasses, I think.
My oversight.
There we are. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Chairman. This is an annual document that committee receives. It's the business plan in line with best practice. The pension fund produces a business plan to inform its agenda of business for the year. It's mainly used as an aid memoir, really, and a waypoint signal for the work of the committee, because most of them are business as usual. Usual items that you're used to receiving. However, every 3 years, for example, we'll have the triennial evaluation process, and that kicks in, and investment strategy review. So at Appendix 1, you'll see the well-worn business plan outlining the key activities of the fund. Obviously, as Andre has indicated earlier on, and with our newly appointed lead advisor, Philip, we'll be working to review that and perhaps introduce more items on that work plan as they arise. However, as you can see in the main, that they're assigned to officers or the actuary or the investment consultants, and we'll work in the background and bring appropriate reports to the committee to consider and approve any decisions arising. Also appended to the document then, Chair, is the again best practice risk register, and I know in parts of our one-to-one discussions, Chairman, you've raised your concerns about key person risk in terms of personnel within both the investment side and also the admin side there, and it's highlighted as a key risk within the risk register about having an appropriate resource section. And you know, perhaps Philip and Andre may be able to comment from their experience with other funds, but you know, LGPS specialists in both the investment side and the admin side are rarer than hen's teeth. You know, they are difficult to recruit, positions to recruit to. However, you know, we're lucky enough to have well experienced staff in place at the moment. But you're right, Chairman, to flag it up as a risk. You know, the succession planning. The committee did approve a resourcing plan earlier last year to strengthen the admin side, and then also appoint an investment management accountant to work alongside Karen, with a view to them gaining experience and you know, hopefully bring a bit of fresh blood into the investment side of the business and work alongside Karen and gain some of her experience. So that's the risk register. And then we have, you know, just formally just reiterate the revised asset allocation that Andre referred to in his question earlier on, in that, you know, you can see that we significantly reduced the equity exposure in the portfolio, and in the introduction of a whole raft of yielding real asset alternatives in the form of timber, agriculture, etc. in the last 12 months or so. So you can see that ongoing, and I hate to use the word de-risking because you know, it's reducing the level of risk, but you can't de-risk it completely. And we're not saying we're doing that because you wouldn't get a return. But what we are doing is reallocating some of that risk from our equities portfolio into alternative yielding assets, as per previously reported to committee. And then we have the appropriate budget with our expected expenditure in terms of the normal activities of the fund. And as you can see there, which is pertinent to the next item on the agenda, you know, there is a training budget allocated to both members of the committee and board. And hopefully now that we're moving out of COVID restrictions and you know, we are like this now, sitting in rooms together now, we may be able to have some more face-to-face training, because I know committee members and board members that have been very good in attending online and virtual training in the last 2 or 3 years, but hopefully, you know, we can all get together again and have some in-face training going forward. I'm happy to take questions, Chairman, based on that.
Any questions for Jeff? Yes, Phil.
Maybe just an observation, if I may, on the subject of de-risking, which has popped up a couple of times so far. And it talks a little bit to that point around the funding level that you need to be at before you make material changes to contribution rates and investment risk. What we found in investment strategies for other clients over the last year or two is that one is quite limited in terms of the amount of real de-risking that you can do until the funding level gets to 150, 120%. And the reason you're limited is that de-risking often means lower returns. And lower returns, all other things being equal, mean more upward pressure on contribution rates, which obviously employers can't afford. The other way of looking at de-risking, though, is diversification. benefit of diversification into a variety of different asset classes means that you can bring down the overall risk to the asset portfolio without reducing the level of return that it generates. And that's why I think the interesting focus around de-risking is what else can be done on diversification to protect the gains that you've built up. Diversification does bring complexity, and you'll be conscious of that looking at the list of investments in the portfolio compared with 5-10 years ago. So there is a cost to doing it, but it is well worth the effort.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, if I can make a comment on that, I think it does get much more complex for Jeff and his team. But as you said, the cost for extra staff members to enable us to diversify is so small compared to the benefits that I think it's an absolute no-brainer. I mean, the stuff we did with the residential housing, that just shows that it's a lot more hassle, but you can still get those returns. So yeah, I think it's we're doing the right thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Will.
Sure.
Right. This item 4C, we have to vote on it. So if we could have a vote on that, please.
Recommendation on page 60, Chairman.
Is everybody happy to vote?
That's all in favour, Chair. That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we're on to 4D, which is the breaches report. Again, over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. This is for information item, a regular report on the agenda of the committee. Again, it's to bring to the attention of the committee the operational breaches that we're required to report to you. I'm glad to say that none of them serious breaches, but as required, we're required to report even trivial breaches to the committee, and they're the usual items on page 104. And then again, as at the request of committee, we provided additional detail on the nature of the breach on page 105. Again, it was the usual suspect, small community council, and their small amounts in terms of late contributions.
Thank you very much. Excellent. So now it's onto trustee training, which is 4E. Again, you can take this, Jeff.
Thank you, Chairman. I did reference this item in the business plan, and it's quite pertinent. We've got a new committee member joining us there from Neath Talbot, Councillor. I'm going to have to call him Phil 2 or something like that. Phil Rogers, but very much welcome, Councillor Rogers. And I have, as we're meeting, just sent an email to Councillor Rogers, detailing his obligation now that he's a member of the committee to ensure that he's suitably trained and has the tools at his disposal to discharge his duties, and that responsibility is incumbent on you all as committee members. I know there are more well-seasoned members of the committee like Councillor Downing, Councillor Mike Lewis, have been on the committee for a number of years, but we do have some relatively new members of the committee on board, and their continued professional development is ongoing. I'm glad to say that the committee's attendance at training that we put on is pretty good, although it could be better. And I think some metrics within the report there that shows the attendance of the training that we've had during the last year there on page 111. It's sort of hovering around the 50% mark attendance, but that is both yourselves as committee and also the local pension board. We recognise you're all busy individuals, and you have your day jobs and your ward member responsibilities, but in agreeing to be members of the pension fund committee, you do by default sign up to your obligations in respect of your obligations under the CIPFA code and the pensions regulators' knowledge and framework and understanding requirements. We're here to help you, attain those levels expected of you. There is a budget available, and we'll try and put on as appropriate training for you as required. I know there was great feedback and great interaction on the session that Hyman's put on just before Christmas on our responsible investment policy workshop. There was a very well attended, great engagement, and a great output, because it was a working working workshop with clear outputs arising from that, and we're happy to facilitate more of the same going forward. But then hopefully now that we are back to normal in terms of a business footing, hopefully the committee and board will be able to attend more organised events on site, off site, and you'll be able to network with other committee and board members like you used to be able to pre-pandemic. Chairman, there is a recommendation on page 106, but again, I'm happy to take more detailed questions on the same.
Well, I have one question. Have you any details of any future training in the near future for the committee?
In the main, the training that we've identified is via the WPP at the moment. It's a very detailed and quite a busy schedule of timetable training from WPP, and it's across a whole range of topics. However, in terms of Swansea specific training, we're going to work that up with our advisors, Hyman's. As I say, Andre and myself and Philip we're talking about what's going to come out of the work that we're doing, reviewing the ISS and the responsible investing work, and so that there is plenty of opportunity for committee to get involved in that. However, in terms of schedule events that members can attend, I do have a list of events that I'm happy to discuss with you, Chairman, and then we can determine what are the most appropriate ones that the committee members can and would like to attend.
Thank you, Jeff. I think Phil's got his hand up on screen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The only comment I got on training is, I know I've been here for quite a while, but at the same time, when we get training where officers and members are there together, there's one language for councillors, and there's a completely different language for Jeff and Claren. And sometimes we get lost in the language. I see a few people nodding their heads. So more training for just members, I think, would go down much better, Jeff.
Thanks, Phil, and point well made. We're all guilty of lapsing into jargon and acronym speak, and I'm afraid it's the nature of the beast. But you're quite right that it should be attendee specific, and we do try and feed that back to all our third party partners, and I'm sure Hyman's, because the majority of their clients are LGPS, are very cognizant of that fact and try and communicate it to the facilitators as well. But no, it's a point well made, and please, as well, I implore all attendees and members to, if they're not sure of anything, I'll ask the question on at the meeting, or ask them to explain. They're not averse to rowing back and explaining to you, because to the practitioners themselves, I'm afraid that gobbledygook is second nature, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Any more questions for Jeff?
I thought I would just briefly comment also, if that's okay, Chair, on that comment from Councillor Downing, which I think is a very good one, and just to say that we'll definitely take that on board, especially at any upcoming training around the strategy review and the investment strategy, and understand that some of these topics are very technical, but we'll try to make sure that we have go back to basics as required, and also have the relevant information for you to make decisions, and that both are in both of those elements are covered in the training that we deliver.
Thank you, Andre. Question from Phil.
So an observation, actually. One other thing that we could do, if it's helpful, is commit to putting a glossary into any document we produce. It's something I do for other clients, and it's just there. You can refer to it if we haven't, if we have slipped into jargon accidentally.
I think that would be very, very helpful. Thank you, Phil. There's no more questions. I'll move on to item 5, which is sorry. Sorry, we have a recommendation. Yes. Can we vote on the recommend?
Page 106.
Where's that page?
106.
Yes, on the front of the report, page 106.
That's all in favour. That's carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Again, I'll try. We'll move on now to item 5, which is exclusion of the public. So could we have a vote on that, please? Thank you. Can you stop recording now, Jeremy?